All right, so what we're going to do is look at the SIGN sign of the sine, cosine, and tangent functions because, you know, we could look at cosecant, secant, and cotangent as well, but remember, they're reciprocals. And taking the reciprocal of a number does not ever affect the sign of that number. So if you have a positive number, the reciprocal was always positive. So it's kind of overkill. So thinking about sine of theta, and remember, sine of theta is y over r. Now let's think about something here. R is always positive, right? So that means that the SIGN sign of sine of theta relies on what the y-coordinate is. So that means if y is positive, sine is positive. And if y is negative, sine is negative. So that means sine of theta is positive in the first quadrant and the second quadrant, and negative in the third and the fourth. Okay, let's think about cosine now. Cosine, remember, is x over r. And again, r is always positive. So that means if x is positive, cosine is positive, and if x is negative, cosine is negative. All right, so if x is positive, that's here and here, right? And if x is negative, that's here and here. So cosine is positive in the first and fourth quadrants. Cosine is negative in the second and third. Okay, so now one last one. Let's look at tangent here. We know that's y over x. Now that one's a little bit trickier. This one's going to be positive if y and x have the same sign. So that means tangent is going to be positive in the first quadrant because that's all positive numbers, right? But tangent's also going to be positive in the third quadrant because in the third quadrant, your x and y are always negative. In the other quadrants, x is negative and y is positive, or vice versa. So that means these are negative. So that means that we have, let's look at what they have in common. All the trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. That's why we like the first quadrant so much. And they all differ as far as the other ones. So this is kind of an interesting thing. If we look at this in summary, if we want to look at which ones are positive, well, let's look at this. All of them are positive. Now, which one is positive in the second quadrant? Only sine. Which one is positive in the third quadrant? Only tangent. And which one is positive in the fourth quadrant? Only c, cosine. So if you think about it going around the circle this way, one mnemonic that seems to work, especially with pre-calculus students, is because you're usually, heading for calculus, all students take calculus. All positive, sine positive, tangent positive, cosine positive. And there we have how to figure out which quadrant we're in with which trig function. So just to pull this together, let's state the quadrant in which terminal side of theta lies if, now, so part A we know, if sine of theta is positive and cosine theta is negative. Well, if sine of theta is positive, that means we have to be in quadrants 1 or 2. If cosine of theta is negative, well, let's see. Cosine is positive in 1 and 4, so cosine must be negative in 2 and 3, and it must be quadrant 2. Now looking at this next one, secant is positive, cotangent is negative. Well, remember, we don't really have that information sitting there, but we do know that secant and cosine will be the same as far as sines go because they're reciprocals. So saying that secant is positive is the same as saying, or is equivalent to saying cosine is positive. So if cosine is positive, we know we're in either quadrant 1 or 4. If tangent is negative, well, it's positive in 1 and 3, so it's negative in 2 and 4. We must be in quadrant 4. So this is how we're going to start to pinpoint, if we have a value of a trig function, where does it belong? That's coming up next. Thanks for watching.